Well, I'd like to take a little bit of a detour, though not leaving the semantic approach. But as you know, I've done a number of episodes recently on quantum mechanics and the interpretations of quantum theory. But what is the relationship of the semantic approach to what you call the quantum mechanics interpretation wars? So how did the semantic approach look at things differently from the received view? Because quantum mechanics, as you already mentioned, or quantum theory, is one of these three big theories. I think you referenced evolution and relativity that came before or around the time of the logical positivists and has been the focus for much of the past 100 years.
Well, I was talking about the prehistory of the semantic approach, saying von Neumann and Berkhoff and Weil, right? Well, the first paper to mention the prehistory is an article by von Neumann and Berkhoff about logic of quantum mechanics. And now when we look at it, we say, that is the semantic approach to quantum theory, okay? So in other words, it was in 1936 that the first item was really published, though nobody recognized it as such, right? At the same time, this comes from von Neumann, who had a very specific interpretation of the quantum theory. He didn't formalize it, but he, not in the sense of the logician, he didn't formalize in the sense of the logician, but he presented the mathematical theory systematically, okay? So, the semantic approach was in there from the beginning, because the way we want to talk about theories in general is exactly the way in which Berkhoff and von Neumann talked about quantum mechanics, right? So it was immediate that this was a playing field. It was the place where we would, take up arms, so to speak. And so in the interpretations after the Second World War, right, we could see this actually going on in many places, but mostly by scientists. So in Switzerland, there were Jauch and Piron developing what they call the logical approach to quantum mechanics. In Italy, Toraldo and Dalla Chiara. In Germany, Mittelstadt. In Finland, so on and so forth. They were all doing this. They were all mathematical physicists, basically, working on foundations, right? And philosophers stepped in. We all went at it in this logical way, which was basically the semantic approach. Geoffrey Boop, who had been a student of Bohm, then developed what he called the logical interpretation, the logical interpretation of quantum mechanics. And later on showed how there was a whole array of things that could be put in that form. So that's the connection between the two, that a lot of the work was suddenly being done in that specific form.
Something particular that I wanted to ask about, you already mentioned von Neumann and Bohr, but how did Bohr conceive of the division between micro and macroscopic in nature? And then how did von Neumann respond to this?
There were two big issues, okay? And there was a sociological change before the Second World War and after the Second World War. Right? Bohr and the Copenhagen scientists like Heisenberg were very influential, right? And many scientists, I think, simply followed them. Von Neumann, to begin, didn't think that he was doing anything that they were not doing, that he was just actually explaining what they meant. The Copenhagen view was this. Yes, in quantum mechanics, the physicist is building models of the phenomena, but he only builds a model of what's on the other side beyond his instrument. There's always this dividing line that he only makes a model of what is beyond the instrument. Now, if he wants to model the instrument too, fine, but then he steps one step back and the dividing line is a bit closer, that's all, okay? Um, so that means that you can never think that the world is a quantum mechanical system, because there's no dividing line anymore if you say that, right? So this was their point of view. Their observer. It's always observer relative, or observation relative, or measurement relative, right? The big opposition to that was not, von Neumann was totally in accord with that. He tried to explain it. He tried to make it clear that you could consistently say this, right? When it was not accepted was in Russia. In Russia, they thought that the Copenhagen people were idealists, and you couldn't be a Marxist and be an idealist. You had to be a realist. Okay, so their physicists wrote about it in very interesting ways too. Bokinchev, for example, that it's just mechanics. It's just mechanics, just like Newtonian mechanics. Okay, that point of view, was not there in the West until after the Second World War, and then suddenly you see it cropping up all over the place. With rival interpretations of quantum mechanics, and a big shift because they wanted to use quantum mechanics in cosmology. Now, cosmology is a theory about the world as a whole. So if you want to use quantum mechanics there, you have to say the world is a quantum mechanical system. And so then you can't say it's observer relative, because there's no observer outside the world. And so these new interpretations, the many worlds interpretation, Bohm's interpretation, all these, they all start with, it's not observer relative. We're talking about everything is a mechanical system, a quantum mechanical system. Right? But then, there was no single way to do that. There were many different ways to do that. Right? All of them having their difficulties, obviously. They were all being developed. I mean, lots of problems to solve, right? But it's very interesting to see this big change, that happened in, that suddenly this way of approaching the theory so that it could be a theory that would, not have this observer relative limitation, became suddenly the gospel, right? Now, that wasn't broken until Rovelli in the 90s. Okay, so I won't talk about that because that's after the period we were talking about. But it remained dominant among the interpretations. Nevertheless, looking at it, from a logical point of view, it was possible, if you wanted, to maintain some of the insights of the Copenhagen school against.
Sure. But I'll before you talk about that, I'll just mention one thing, because I pulled up a quote from you that I thought was really nice. And you said that von Neumann had already given the correct response in the 1930s to Bohr, and it is, there is no dividing line in nature, but only one drawn by the modeler who chooses what to model. And I thought that was really good.
Correct, exactly, right. Yeah, but von Neumann, I think, didn't think he was disagreeing. He thought he was explaining. Yeah.
Okay, but now please continue.
Yeah, okay, well, so after the war, everybody working on it took the point of view that it's not observer relative. Okay, it's not observer relative. It's just about physical systems in the straightforward, way. In the way it always did it in mechanics, right? Okay, but then the question was, could you still maintain some of the Copenhagen views? Were there still ones that you could? And what that meant was, does every interpretation have to have hidden variables? Or could you hidden variables, meaning things that really made a physical difference, but that were not coming out in the experiments that were being done, right? Whereas the Copenhagen view would have said, no, if it doesn't come out in the experiments, there's nothing there, right? And the answer is, yes, you could, and I'll tell you what is the very, very basic point on which these interpretations differ, that are more Copenhagen and less Copenhagen. Suppose you have two quantities, Q and R, let's say, right? And the theory tells you they can have certain values. And when you make your measurements, unfortunately, there's no certainty about which value you'll find. Now, this was typical in quantum mechanics, that there would be indeterminism in your measurement results. You make the same measurement twice, you may get two different answers. Okay, but the theory will tell you there's a certain statistical distribution in your answers. For instance, you have some uranium here and a Geiger counter. There's a nice statistical pattern in the number of clicks over the long run. Okay? So we call these the measurement statistics for that quantity. Now, here's the question. Suppose two quantities have the same measurement statistics. Are they the same quantity? Are they just two different, you just have two different names for the same quantity? Or could there be different quantities? Because in fact, there's a reference to something that's not coming out in the measurement, in the measurement statistics. Okay? Sometimes people use the word realism there, and they say the second alternative we call realist. But I mean, that's, a confusing adaptation of the word realist, really, right? I mean, both are very straightforward ways of talking about physical systems. So the Copenhagen line would be, no, that is, nothing there that doesn't come out in the measurement results. And the anti-Copenhagen view, the one people who put in hidden variables, they say, sorry, you could have two quantities, same measurement statistics, but they are measuring something different. And so what the actual measurement procedure is might depend on the context in which it's done, for example. You can see how the Copenhagen line is a very empiricist line, right? They are not willing to give, they don't respect things that don't come out on a level where you see the measurement results. Whereas the things like the Bohmian interpretation, right? They have a different point of view about this. Yeah.